Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So I wanted to talk about a theory that I think has been around for quite some time, and that is the theory of, did Lizzie see the Whisperers? And it's a really interesting theory. I don't know if there's other, I guess evidence out there that would maybe, prove that the theory is right or wrong, but just that question of, did Lizzie see the Whisperers? Is that why she believed that walkers were real people? Like, just that question, I do want to give some thoughts on, because I actually went back and rewatched the episode The Grove, and I just gotta say, very amazing episode, phenomenal episode, one of the best episodes of The Walking Dead that I've really ever watched, and it still holds up to this day. It's probably one of the creepiest episodes ever. There's some moments where it feels very hopeful. You feel sort of nostalgic watching it. The tone of this episode is just amazing, and this hopeful future that all the characters have, seems like it's almost going to happen when they find this house, but there's just all of these things that keep happening, and again, you just have that horror element there, and where this story goes, it's just one of the best episodes ever. It really is. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the idea that Lizzie potentially saw the Whisperers at one point, which led her to believe that walkers were real people, that they weren't, zombies. So before we go any further, definitely make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. I will say, in terms of watching this episode, I think because Daryl Dixon season 2 is premiering in just like 25 days from now, I do recommend checking out this episode specifically, because obviously this episode, features Carol, and it's one of the, bigger Carol episodes of the series, and I definitely recommend checking this out just to sort of, get excited for The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon season 2, because obviously season 2 is going to focus a lot on Carol, and that's really exciting because I know that there's going to be a lot of Sophia aspects to it. We saw that a lot in the trailer. In this episode, The Grove, she actually does talk about Sophia quite a bit. So yeah, I definitely recommend going back to check that out. Like, literally just watch that one episode. It's so good. And so to get into the whole idea of, did Lizzie see the Whisperers, I will say that in terms of, how the story starts, it really does seem like it's a possibility. And I think that there is a possibility that maybe it did happen. And I think that's the craziest thing about this idea, is that it can be possible. Like, there's a way for this to happen. So in terms of Lizzie and Mika's backstory, I believe that they are from Florida. I think that at some point during the apocalypse, or as everything was happening, they eventually ended up in Atlanta, or at least in Georgia. And I think Lizzie was actually diagnosed with something, before the apocalypse. And so I think that's why she always looked at the flowers, because when she looked at the flowers, it calmed her down, right? And so I think that, obviously that is most likely the explanation as to why she sees walkers as people, but I think that it is very interesting when you think of the idea that maybe very early on, since we don't know the actual origin of the Whisperers and where they formed, like, we don't know the actual location. We know that Alpha eventually ran into somebody who was the leader of the Whisperers, but we don't know where the group was actually formed or when. Obviously, it was early on at some point, right? And so it's very possible that this actually did happen, that Lizzie at one point heard the Whisperers whispering, because that's exactly what they do, right? Like, they whisper when they're in a herd, because that's just how they communicate and whatnot. And it's possible that Lizzie heard that, and that just, it made her believe that walkers were actual people, because obviously if you're younger and you're seeing something like that, like, you are going to think that. Everyone else was like, they were all confused at what was happening with the walkers once they heard them talking, right? Like, if you remember Eugene and Rosita and Daryl, like, all their reactions, like, they were all so confused, right? And so in the Grove, Carol does notice that Lizzie thinks that walkers are just different. And that's what I like about the episode, because you do see that Lizzie is starting to view walkers differently. And Lizzie and Mika at one point have this whole argument about whether or not walkers are people. Lizzie freaks out at one point after Carol kills this walker, and she's just like, that was her friend, or she's my friend and you killed her, or whatever she said. And during a conversation on the railroad tracks, actually, with Mika, she said that she heard whispers. And obviously, if you know anything about the Whisperers at all, that's how they communicate, right? Like, that's just how they communicate in a herd, so that walkers don't attack them or anything like that. They just whisper, and they try to sound like a walker a little bit, and they just, that's how they survive. They're a very, very interesting and fascinating group, and I feel like The Walking Dead should tell some more stories with the Whisperers, because there's a lot of stuff in terms of their origins, and even afterwards, because the Whisperers technically aren't all gone. Like, yes, Alpha and Beta are gone, and a lot of the people that were a part of them are gone, but the group is actually still out there, and we don't know what happened to them. And so, yeah, but getting back to the whole thing with Lizzie, I think that it would be really cool if, that was something that was somewhat, I guess, hinted at some point in the future. I don't know how they could ever really do that, to be honest. There's really no way, unless you did like a Tales of the Walking Dead season 2 episode where you see the origin of the Whisperers, and maybe there's a scene where you see like a younger Lizzie there or something, and she sees one of the Whisperers, and then that would just be like, oh, like you would feel so bad for her, right? Because she actually saw a Whisperer, and that just caused her to believe all these things, and it would just add a whole other layer of tragedy to that episode, which I think would be kind of interesting to do. But I don't know if you want to go back and really mess with an episode story like that, especially one that's really amazing like The Grove. But again, I think that the idea of this is really interesting. It's fascinating. And I think in order for this to have happened, obviously she would have had to have seen a Whisperer at some point before she got to the prison, which obviously is very, very possible. And again, this is always just going to be one of those questions that is just so interesting to talk about, right? Like, did Lizzie see a Whisperer at some point and just like it caused all of what happened, right? And to go back to The Grove for a second, I know I've been talking about it being one of the best episodes ever. It really, truly is. And I think that, what sets the tone specifically with this episode is the very first scene. You see the kettle there, and the music in the scene is Maybe by the Ink Spots, and it just perfectly sets up the tone of like fall. And it's hard to describe the scene in general, but it's just, the slow camera movement. And that's the one thing I noticed about this episode specifically. I never rewatched anything from season 4 lately, so I don't know if it was just this director specifically or if it was in previous episodes and it was just sort of an overall thing. But this episode, there was a lot of shots just like on a character, and they would just have a lot of dialogue, and not even a lot of dialogue a lot of the time either. It would just be like literally you would just see them acting, and you just focus so much on each character. Like, there was not a lot of cutting to like this shot or that shot. Like, it was honestly like really just like you really were there with the characters. And I think that's what makes this episode so just interesting. And I think whenever you think of The Walking Dead, that's why that became a meme, right? Like, look at the flowers. It's because of that. Like, that was just such a phenomenal moment in The Walking Dead's history that makes me really excited for Daryl Dixon season 2, because Carol being back in the story, she really does add so much to The Walking Dead, and she's such an important part to all of it that I can't wait to see where the story is going to go next. We saw in the trailer that Sophia is going to be showing up, or at least there's going to be a flashback of Sophia. She's probably going to see Sophia around. Obviously, the role has been recast, right? And so I think, it's possible that whenever we do see Sophia, she's going to be the zombie version of her, or maybe she actually is just Sophia and not a walker, and she's talking with Carol and whatnot. I just think that, yeah, there's going to be some really amazing emotional episodes here. And, in terms of, are we ever going to get an episode like The Grove in the future? I think that it is very possible, but I think the issue right now is that The Walking Dead right now, in terms of the shows they have out, there's only like 6 episodes. I think Dead City season 2 might have 8 episodes, which is good. It's definitely better. But The Walking Dead season 4 obviously had 16. And I don't know if you're ever going to get 16 episodes. But the thing about getting 16 episodes in a show is that you can have an episode like this, right? Like, this is what fans really like, is these episodes where they're like bottle episodes where you just focus on this one aspect of the story. But again, it's not filler, because a lot of what Lizzie went through was actually teased a lot earlier on with like the rats at the prison. And there was also a bunch of stuff with Karen and David and all that with Tyrese and Carol's story. So there was a whole like story worked out there. It felt more like a bottle episode because it was just in one location, one place, but it's because it was crafted really well. And that's what I'm missing with The Walking Dead, is just that element to it where you can have an episode like The Grove and it doesn't have to focus on Rick Grimes and like this whole bigger story and all of that. Like, honestly, The Grove is probably one of the best episodes ever, and Rick Grimes is not even in the episode. So like, you don't need Rick Grimes to have good Walking Dead stories, right? And so I hope that in the future that the spinoffs get more episodes. I think that would be honestly really incredible, because I think 6 episodes for sure is not enough at all, but getting 8 episodes to 10 episodes, even 12 or something like that, I think would be honestly really amazing, because you could have one of those episodes there that is just like really well written, and if it's crafted really well and it's teased beforehand earlier in the season, it would just be honestly really incredible. So yeah, this episode was phenomenal, and the question of did Lizzie see the Whisperers, I think is something that is really fun to talk about, because it almost like makes sense, right? Like, it almost makes sense that, yeah, she would have saw I guess the whisperers walking by at some point, maybe it was just one person and she was just like, oh, they're actual people. And the entire time she just believed that, but obviously she couldn't see things differently. She didn't really remember specifically what happened or whatever, right? Like, it's a really interesting theory, really interesting idea. So yeah, but definitely post all your thoughts down below on this. Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.